and gentlemen, welcome back to Not That Bad, a movie podcast, the show where we take movies that people don't like and we tell you why they're not that bad. We got a very special episode today, and we're going to get into that in a minute, but first, we got to get into our normal intros. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Connor, aka the Hollow Man's lazy brother, the Wallow Man, and I am joined by my illustrious co-host, Mr. Gabe Tice. Gabe, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm the Hollow Man. Look, I'm disappearing into my green screen. I'm doing very well, Connor. I'm doing very well because we have quite a special guest.
Yes, we do.
If I can say this quickly, this guest is the reason I even started making YouTube videos, reviews online in the first place.
Ah.
Yeah, and that is none other than Mr. Cody Leach. Cody,
Me?
how are you doing? Yeah, you, man.
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
We're doing great. God, this is so awesome that we were able to get you this. And I thought about doing a little prank on you, like bringing you into the Zoom room and then saying, "All right, Cody, change the plans. We're talking about Freddy's Dead instead." But I couldn't do that to you.
Ooh.
Yeah,
yeah.
Couldn't ambush you with that there.
No.
But no, we are not talking about Freddy's Dead, nor are we talking about Halloween 5. Today, we are talking about your pick today, The Hollow Man. Tell us a little bit about your history with this film and what kind of compelled you to pick it today.
It's always been one of my favorites. This is a movie that I saw in the theaters with my dad. So it came out in 2000, so I was 10 years old. It's a movie that I actually remember when the DVD came out. I was so excited to rewatch it that I actually set an alarm and got up early the next day before school so that I could watch the whole movie before I got ready.
Oh, wow.
And it's just continued to be one of those movies I don't hear too many people talk about. I was actually surprised to see it pretty low on Letterboxd. Like whenever you guys told me the concept, I went through like 15 movies trying to think of purposely trying to think of what movies, like, all right, what movies are people going to bitch about? And I was like, damn, 3.5, damn, 3. And I got to this one and it was like, what, 2.7 or 2.5 or something. And I was like, oh, but yeah, it's a creepy movie. It's got a lot of, it's Paul Verhoeven, so that's the guy that's known for Ultraviolence and RoboCop and Total Recall, and that definitely follows through in the third act of this movie. It's bloody as all hell. I think
Sexual violence and perversion, which
another thing he's known for.
Yeah,
Yes,
there's a healthy dose of that to this film.
Yes, and Kevin Bacon is awesome in it. I think that he's really like kind of funny and charming at first, and then just slowly snaps. And even though you can't see him, like all of his physical performance and the green screen paint and everything comes through. And yeah, for a movie that, when we got The Invisible Man just a couple of years ago, which is awesome as well.
Yes.
Everybody was hyping that up as like,
yeah.
this is the best iteration. And I'm like, you better put some fucking respect on Hollow Man. What the hell?
Well, like Cody said, everybody, if this is a movie that you've never heard of, which for me, it was weird because I didn't feel like I had this movie in my brain at all. And then as I was looking this movie up, I recognized the cover of the second Hollow Man movie, which I remembered seeing all over the place at video stores when I was a kid.
The one with Christian Slater, right?
Yes.
Free Mr. Robot, Christian Slater.
Which is also technically eligible for this show, but will it be here? Probably not. That being said, as Cody had said, this movie was released in 2000, 26% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 2.7 on Letterboxd.
Travesty.
Sort of surprising when you look at the director's history. I mean, movies like RoboCop, Total Recall, Starship Troopers, Basic Instinct, but he also directed Showgirls.
Yes.
So you kind of see the comparisons in movies that people didn't like in there. But Gabe, do you have any history with this movie yourself? I knew you had seen it previously.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, this was a forbidden fruit movie. A movie I was too young to see, but I was very curious. I grew up a huge fan of Universal monster movies, so big fan of the original Claude Rains Invisible Man, and this movie is a loose sort of retelling of that basic story.
Well, I have read tons of Letterboxd reviews. I'm geared up for the ugly section, but before we get there, we got a couple of stops, and one of those is talking about the good things that we like about this movie, things that we gravitate towards, things that we love that make this movie maybe not that bad. Cody, I'm going to start with you since this was your pick today. But let's get started with one of the things that you do enjoy about this movie.
I think it's a really dark but realistic take on what you would do if you had that power, if you were a fucked up person, of course.
Yeah.
But it shows a guy who already has a bit of a god complex even before he goes invisible, and he thinks he's the smartest guy around, and he's in charge, and he's ready to change the world, and he wants to make all the rules and break all the rules. And so whenever he gets this power to where if he utilizes it in certain ways, he can pretty much go unpunished for certain things. It slowly starts to kind of manifest throughout the movie to where he starts to fuck with his coworkers. He fondles one of them that's always giving him shit when she's sleeping. And then as he starts to slowly lose his mind, then it goes full blown just villain where he, sexual assault, and he's killing people, and he's trying to basically just wrap the whole thing up, get rid of all the evidence that he exists, and then go out into the world and be able to do whatever he wants. And it's just a really dark, sadistic take on that old Invisible Man story. So I like it for that. I like the fact that it has balls. And then, you could probably argue that maybe some of it doesn't age so well, but I think it holds up pretty well. I think that the special effects are pretty awesome in it. I mean, where the scenes where they're trying to bring the gorilla back, and you just start to see like the tendons and the veins slowly, and all of a sudden you see muscular tissue. And even when Kevin Bacon goes invincible and it's the opposite, and it starts to just tear everything away. I just think it's a really cool visualization of that whole thing. I think the cast is really entertaining, and there's a lot of variety in the characters there. I mean, Josh Brolin, it was the first time I'd seen him in quite a while because he was kind of quiet there in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now he's an A-lister, Oscar, all that kind of stuff. But you see him. Even Elizabeth Shue was another one. I'm like, man, all these people from the 80s just showing up in this. And just it's a really fun cast that you see them all kind of slowly get into this horrific situation. So it's just a really fun movie. I mean, it's dark. I could see some things turning some people off, but it's just if you like darkness, if you like gore, if you like really fucked up villains, I think it goes for it.
Yeah, and one of the things too, like you talk about the story of sort of how he gets to the Hollow Man, becomes the Hollow Man, as they say, but the look for me, I mean, we see it behind Gabe there, hauntingly looking behind Gabe there, but that was one of the things that I really kind of took away from this movie as the thing that left, I think, the biggest mark on me. I mean, they could have easily gone the direction that they had gone in every single time, pretty much, that they told the story of the Invisible Man, whether it was in some sort of written form or a comic book or a film, and just wrap him up and put some sunglasses on him, and there you go. But they take it to another level in this movie, as they do with a lot of the concepts in it. And for me, the look just worked, and it's one of the things that I think really complemented the performance that Kevin Bacon gave us. And Gabe, I'm curious, does the Hollow Man fall into that category for you, the Hollow Man himself, of something that you enjoyed? And if not, would you introduce us to one of the things you did like about this movie?
By the Hollow Man, do you mean like his character or his design?
His character.
I mean, everything involving Sebastian Cain, from the performance to the design, I think is the best thing about this movie. I think it's one thing they really nailed. And, the thing that stood out to me about this film is the way they updated the classic ideas introduced in the earlier tellings of the Invisible Man story, before they had the bandages. And that's an iconic look to me. And that's a look that, people love to reference. But this movie introduces a really haunting sort of answer to that, if you will. Then you also get into, what Cody was talking about the way they actually conceptualized the science of invisibility. And what I mean is, you see them like peeling away. It looks painful. It satisfies the gorehounds in the audience, but it's also like this really inventive new take. And there are so many new details. Like he can't close his eyes technically, like because his eyelids are transparent. And I'm thinking, why not just give him a sleeping mask? Like, holy shit, like this guy's gotta blink sometime, right? But when it came to the concept of just invisibility, what do we do with that? And how can we really make that feel fresh? I think they did an excellent job just all around.
Yeah, and to Cody's point as well here, and I appreciate you bringing this up. One of the things that the audience really did enjoy about this film, and I was really surprised because with movies that utilize special effects from this time period, the audience can be a little harsh. I mean, we've covered movies a few years after this, like Terminator 3, where the audience was very, very harsh on the use of CGI and some of the things that they did in the special effects department when it comes to computer generated stuff. But the audience in the reviews I read they were overwhelmingly very kind to the effects in this film, and I'm happy to see it because I think it's something that needs to be highlighted. And that scene with the gorilla is kind of the first time where you're like, holy shit, yeah, they really went for it. And by the end of the movie, I was just impressed with everything that they did with the CGI.
I think it all holds up, whether you're talking about the CGI effects on just the invisibility or you're talking about the gore effects. I think that they're all pretty damn solid. And like you were saying, like the 2000s, that's an era where you tend to use only bad examples. You pull out, the Scorpion King and stuff like that. This is what CGI used to look like before we figured our shit out. And Hollow Man was one of those weird, just kind of like under the radar movies that got it right. And they didn't overdo it for as big as the concept is visually. And so, yeah, I think it holds up pretty well. Something funny that you reminded me of too, Gabe, whenever you were mentioning the fact about the transparent eyelids. Did anybody notice that they don't realize that until Kevin Bacon goes under? And they're like, oh, yeah, his eyelids are transparent. They're turning the lights down. It's like, how many animals have you been torturing?
Oh, Peter
realize that they can't fucking sleep.
No wonder they're all pissed off. That. Yeah.
Yeah, PETA would have a word with the scientific team. I mean, there's even, a lot of allusions to the fact that Kevin Bacon is so obsessed and he has such a God complex that he doesn't care about the well-being of these animals.
Yeah.
That's why that one woman played by Kim Dickens is giving him so much shit. That being said, I feel like they should have realized what Kevin Bacon was going to go through before he woke up. I just really want to devote some time to Kevin Bacon. I mean, I don't know where this lines up in his filmography in terms of this is obviously way after Footloose, but I don't know if he had reinvented himself as a character actor yet. I guess this was after Tremors, but to me, he makes the best case for himself as being one of the most both charming and diabolical actors of his generation. I think those are the exact words that Paul Verhoeven used. That's why they cast Kevin Bacon in this role. So I want to hear from you guys. Do you think his performance elevated the movie? Because I think on paper, Sebastian Cain could have been a pretty standard, villain for this type of story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of the traits, even before he starts to turn villainous, without the right actor, could easily have been the most unlikable character in the movie. And I don't know what this says about me, but even after he goes villainous, there's still elements of him that I kind of like. And I'm like, I don't know if it's just because it's Kevin Bacon or his personality or his charm or whatever, but like he commands the whole thing. I mean, from the minute he shows up, he's a dickhead. Like I said, everybody's below him. It's all his rules. Oh, the government wants me to do this? To hell with them. We're doing this. And it just something about his natural charm that he's always had just makes the character hard to hate. Until you don't really have much of a choice by the third act.
Yeah, he doesn't give you much of a choice by the end of it. But, it's funny, like, even though there are things that I will have to say about his character when we get to our personal negatives about the film, I think his performance needs to be highlighted as something that was just, I think he did elevate the role. I think not anybody else. I think there definitely could have been other people who I think would have done a great job in the role. But I think there's just something about him that made this work for him. And I as I was watching the movie, it's funny because when I haven't seen a film before, it's easy for me to picture somebody else in a role. Whether it's a horror film or more dramatic pieces. I can imagine somebody else in that role, and then I can sort of think about it in my head, but I couldn't do that with this role. And I think that says a lot about how he did his position in the film. He elevated everything he was given for me. So yeah, I'm glad you brought it up and wanted to devote some time for that.
Yeah. And when you cast an invisible person, an actor to play an invisible person, you need to have the right voice. It's like casting an actor to play Batman. They have to have the right chin. You got to have the Invisible Man have the right voice. And I think Kevin Bacon's voice is iconic to me now, but I think that's probably largely because of this movie. I think some of the most spine-chilling moments are just hearing this both charming and really creepy voice come out of the ether to say the most fucked up shit. I think the line that stood out to me the most is, you don't know what you're capable of until you don't have to look at yourself in the mirror anymore, something to that effect.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, they're not really shooting for the stars in terms of this story of a somebody going mad with power, but moments like that really solidify what's working about Kevin Bacon, at least in what he's doing.
Yep. No, I completely agree with that. And one thing that I will say too, about people in this movie is somebody that I really liked. Cody had brought up Josh Brolin. That's got to be something that I bring up in this section. I thought that was the one character that I think I liked the most. I mean, I like Elizabeth Shue in this movie. I mean, Adventures in Babysitting, this is not, but I did enjoy her in this film quite a bit. But Josh Brolin, I felt like, he had so many characteristics of just like, he's just sort of your average guy, but like you kind of buy him in the end of the movie as being the guy to kind of take the lead and being the hero in some way, even though well, that's the thing. He doesn't really get that opportunity to really be the full hero that he really could have been because, of what happens to him. But I don't know, man. There was something about that character that I really dug, and seeing what he's accomplishing now, kind of watching this back retroactively, not having seen it before, it was kind of cool to see, like, not where his sort of renaissance started, but it's like a seed planted.
Mm-hmm.
I could see what he would go on to do later on as compared to what he did before this movie.
Well, it's a way for him to remind audiences that he existed. Like, hey, I'm not just the kid from Goonies.
Right, I can do other things here.
Yeah. And speaking of, and I have a lot of good things to say about the supporting cast too, but I want to hear from you, Cody. We talked about Kevin Bacon a lot, but like, I think it was either you or Connor mentioned, we have a stacked cast, especially for this type of movie. So who else stood out to you in this ensemble?
Well, we mentioned Josh Brolin. He's great. Elizabeth Shue, I really liked her as well. She's not somebody that I've seen in kind of a lead role too much outside of the 80s and the early 90s and everything. But every time she shows up, I always feel like she brings something really nice to whatever she's in. So I like the attitude that her character has. Kim Dickens, for the amount that we get of her, I think is a lot of fun, just with her antagonistic relationship with Sebastian, how she's always kind of taking the opposite of whatever he wants to do. She's right in a lot of ways and is kind of the voice of reason that nobody will listen to. I also think that I'm trying to go through the cast right now. You got Greg Grunberg here, who I haven't seen too much of. He's done a lot of TV, but I think he's actually a pretty damn funny character because he's the guy that just says everything at the wrong time. Like he's the guy like kind of tapping Kevin Bacon, like, what'd you do last night, dude? Man, I'd be fucking with people. Like that was fun. And then you even got the guy, let's see, what is his name? Joey Slotnick. Go ahead.
Yeah. You just made me remember. We have the guy who Jim Halpert walks in on in the bathroom in The Office. Does anybody remember that guy? He's like the funny looking scientist who's always speaking to them through that speaker.
Yeah, he was actually Joey Slotnick. He was just
that's his name, Joey Slotnick. I just a repressed memory came back to me, like Jim Halpert walking in on this guy in the bathroom. But I thought he was hilarious.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun too. I always remember him from Nip Tuck. He's got a smaller role in the first couple of seasons where he's like the rival to the main characters, and then his story goes in wild places in that show. But yeah, there's just a lot of fun characters here. Like every single one of them has some bit of personality that adds to both the fun side as well as the drama later on. All of them kind of have, with maybe the exception of Kim Dickens, she's probably the first one that wouldn't have any problem taking down Sebastian if it went that way. But all of them kind of have a little bit of a block, like that can't be him. That's the boss. Like he couldn't have done this. And they all take their own amount of time to finally realize the danger that they're actually in. And pretty much all of them it's too late by that point. But yeah, I like the whole cast. I think there's a weak member of the whole bunch.
Yeah, and I really actually bought Elizabeth Shue and Kevin Bacon's relationship. And, what they're trying to do with them is kind of risky because it could really fall apart with the wrong actors. Like if they got the wrong actor for Sebastian Kane, I would never believe that Elizabeth Shue would even give this guy a second look. But because there's that charisma, and because you do believe that this guy is at least somewhat as smart as he thinks he is, then their whole history becomes believable.
And that's the thing too, like one of the things that we've seen is sort of like a through line from the beginning of this show is that these movies that people think are bad have a lot of things in common, and one of those things is that either their lead or the person that we're supposed to buy into some sort of relationship doesn't have the charisma to carry that sort of thing throughout the movie. We talked about that in the Dead Silence episode. The lead in Dead Silence had no charisma, and even though we didn't have too many bad things to say about that movie, a lot of people did. And it's funny, like I'm not going to get into my final verdict yet, but like looking through the reviews and seeing what people had to say about this movie, when you look at this movie from start to finish, it has none of the regular hallmarks of a bad movie. So it's kind of surprising when you start to see the reviews that come through, and there are definitely things that I can understand people having taken away from their experience, but that's not one of them, and the cast certainly isn't one of them either. Looking through that cast, Joey Slotnick's character in particular, I was actually pretty impressed with, because often characters like his are just like the annoying guy. He's just the one that's there to annoy the shit out of you. You want to see him get killed, or you want. They have one character that's just sort of like, yeah, he's the funny death, or he's the guy that you kind of want to see go. But everybody was pretty endearing. In fact, I felt like when he died, I was actually quite upset. And same with Mary Randall's character. She could have easily been somebody that was just in the background, but. She wasn't. Neither of those two people were up in that little control booth. So, the cast as a whole, I feel like they really did a good job of establishing themselves.
Yeah, as we talk about this, and as we talk about the ensemble nature of the cast, and I think about the third act, which is everybody being stuck with Kevin Bacon trying to stop him from getting out. I realized there's a lot of parallels, kind of, going on with The Thing, with John Carpenter's The Thing. At least when you get to that third act, and it does become that kind of isolated bottleneck, enclosed space kind of horror movie, which there are a lot of, but at least with this movie, you don't have to spend the whole time down there.
Yeah.
But you feel like the environment well enough to where they can get really creative in that space. And that's something I really wanted to start talking about, that whole third act, because, well, there's some complaints I do have about the last 10 minutes of the movie, but the cat and mouse game was much more impressive than I was expecting. Because when you see they have like these heat-seeing goggles, I wasn't really sure how this would play out when they just be able to see him. But Sebastian Kane is smarter than that. So there's this back and forth with him using the heat vents and them using the sprinklers or fire extinguishers. So yeah, throwing it to you, Cody, like when we get to that third act, is that something that really landed for you?
I love the third act of this movie. I don't have hardly any negative things to say about this. I'm just going to warn you. Like, I don't know. This is just a movie that works for me. I got the nostalgia side of it, but even rewatching it, I'm just like, this thing's just fucking good. These people are crazy. So you get to the third act, and I love how intense it gets. I love how full villain mode Kevin Bacon goes, just absolutely unrelenting. I mean, from the moment that he kills the dog, you're like, oh man, like the horror movie sin. They start with that. Okay, this guy ain't fucking around. And he kills every single one of them in a different way. So you get that variety there for the slasher hounds, the different effects you were talking about, to where he's kind of hidden by the heat signatures, which causes a lot of nice tension, because you see something that looks like him, but it's just gas. It's just air. You get the sprinkler segments where it just starts to kind of paint over him. I mean, again, we talked about the effects. I don't want to go redundancy, but all the different things that they go for in a third act, I think it's intense. I mean, all the way to the point where it's just he thinks that it's just him, and then Elizabeth Shue comes back and lights his ass up, and then it's just like, if he wasn't vicious enough at that point, now it's just no holds barred. Like, you've you've ruined his skin. Now he can't even stay invincible because the skin's fried, and so he's just out to kill them in however much of a painful way he can. And for a slasher fan, I dig the way that this movie goes.
Yeah, and honestly, like the third act is actually the last thing that I had down for like the good section, as far as like things I really wanted to discuss, because It just does so well for a third act of a movie for me. It worked on every level, and especially with horror aspects in this film. It's funny as we were watching it. My wife was sleeping for part of it. She wasn't really invested in the movie, so that's fine. But then she woke up and she goes, "What kind of movie is this?" And I was like sci-fi thriller maybe, and I look it up and I was like, oh no, it's sci-fi horror. Okay, like it's been creepy at points, but like where's it gonna go with this? And then we got the third act and I was like, there's the horror.
There it is.
And it's funny because like we talked about the variety of the kills. You brought that up, Cody, but the thing that I liked about it was like it didn't feel forced. None of the variety felt like they were trying to just force a bunch of kills, which is a complaint that I have about movies I even like the Hatchet films. I love the Hatchet movies. But like it's very clear that so much of that creative focus goes into how many ways can we kill these people.
Well, this isn't a gimmick film. No, it's all about Sebastian Cain's intellect, and that's something that is actually very classically appealing to me because that's really the terrifying thing about the original Invisible Man by Claude Rains. It's not just this guy's invisible; like he has the mind of a genius. Imagine what he can do with that. And, we see Sebastian Cain doing all of this nefarious and really crafty stuff in this one little closed space. So I kind of wish there was a sequel about him getting out and us being able to see what he could do out in, society. I know there is a sequel that I never saw, and I don't believe it even has any continuity with this film. But as much as
I've only seen 10 minutes of it, it doesn't.
Oh, shit. Okay. Well, that settles that.
Yeah, there we go.
Don't need to watch that. Yeah. But I mean, that's really the big positive for me at the end of the day is like, I've heard this movie called dumb and schlocky, and, we're going to deal with that in a later section. But as far as like actually the mechanics of how the suspense sequences are constructed, like, I mean, this is Paul Verhoeven. He knows what he's doing. I know he has sort of a rocky career at this point, but he knows what he's doing when it comes to just like fucking people up in movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of that's retroactive too. I mean, like, and I'll get into this when we talk about some of the reviews that I read, but like there's a lot of verbiage that's very specific to this period of time when people are talking about movies like The Hollow Man and his career. So that'll be interesting to sort of get into. But while we are still in the good section, I wanted to see if anybody else had anything they wanted to highlight in particular before we moved on to some of the things that we didn't like and some of the things the audience didn't like.
And I know Cody is very big on this movie, so if you have anything else really like to dive
that you want to hammer down,
to nail home
everything. But we have done a lot of appreciation, so let's talk about some of the things that we don't necessarily appreciate about this film. And I'd like to start with you, Cody, because I know you don't have a lot to say, but do you have at least one thing that you don't enjoy about The Hollow Man?
No, not really, honestly. I mean, there's things, it's one of those movies where I can look at it and I can easily see where some people would be turned off by it. And I think that's where I can go with the negatives, is that it is a very unforgiving movie when it comes to how dark it goes and all the things that Sebastian does. You can make the argument that maybe they play a little bit too much with the sexual assault stuff. I mean, there's a scene where he literally almost pretty much tries to initiate sex with Elizabeth Shue against her will. Then you got the Kim Dickens grope scene, and then you got the full-on rape scene later on. So it's just like, Jesus, we get it. I could get that. Something that I imagine, I haven't read a lot of the reviews, to be honest with you, so I'm curious what you guys are going to get dig out during that section. But I can imagine that some people, the name Verhoeven probably sets them up with the incorrect expectation for this, because he's known for more heady movies, a lot more social commentary, and this is not that movie. This is pretty straightforward. It's just a horror, call it a slasher film by the third act of it. So,
which probably does disappoint some of his fans. Like if you know him from RoboCop and from Starship Troopers, and you're one of those like film bros that are like, no, you don't get it. Like this is probably going to be a disappointing experience on that level, just how straightforward it is.
Yeah, exactly. And, there might have been some room in here for social commentary. I think he makes more of a commentary on just like the inherent evil that some people can have, and, what unparalleled power would give to somebody with a complex like that. But it's subtle. It's not a movie that's trying to, say anything too grand. So, I mean, you could call it maybe low hanging fruit by the end of it. It's
Yeah.
blood, it's gore, it's a little, sexuality in there, but fuck it. I like it.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking now about social commentary, because this time I was comparing it to the most recent Invisible Man,
Yeah.
by Leigh Whannell, which is a movie I really respect, and I admired that direction it took. And I actually think Hollow Man kind of is ahead of the curve, or maybe it's, I don't know. I was questioning, is this a movie about voyeurism, or is this voyeurism? Because you have Kevin Bacon's neighbor who he later assaults, which I don't know if you guys know the history of this, but that scene was much more graphic originally. They had to trim it down.
I can imagine.
Yeah. I mean, it's still like is very upsetting now just with the suggestion, but as I understand, it's Verhoeven. He was willing to cross that line at first, but the MPAA was not. But
reasonably so.
Yeah, I think you see like the idea of a man with invisibility using that to do things that we fear a man would do, right? A powerful man, a man with narcissism, a god complex, a man who already has terrible issues with boundaries when it comes to his female coworkers.
To
say the least. Yeah. And it's Kevin Bacon, so at least part of the audience will still be able to forgive that, to go on this journey with him. But then you get to that middle point of the movie, and at least for me, obviously I couldn't sympathize with him after that scene with the assault. And I'm curious, Cody, not that this has to be categorized as a negative, but when did you stop sympathizing with Sebastian?
Yeah, definitely at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, all guys have that little voice in their head where like, man, if I was invisible, what would I do and everything. And this is like the most extreme, dark, evil version of that. And even whenever he's just looking, and because it's a movie and we're not talking about real life situations, obviously, you look where he's looking across the apartment way and he's just like, God damn it. Oh man, look at that. And then she shuts the blinds and he goes, and then he looks back. Nah, don't even think about it. And you don't know what he's going to do. It's like, what is he just going to go peep on her? Is he going to knock on the door, or what is he going to do? Is he going to go open the blinds for her, tear the blinds off and then leave? Like, I don't know. And then whenever you get to what, he takes it to the absolute fullest extent. That's the moment where it's like, oh yeah, full villain at this point. Sorry, Kevin. And so, yeah, I think that's intended to be that moment. I don't remember if that was before or after he kills the dog.
It's before.
Okay, yeah. So then definitely that's the moment then. So,
I mean, for me, honestly, I stopped sympathizing with him after he fondled Kim Dickens, which did surprise me that they went that far already. And I guess if I'm introducing my own sort of con, I do think that his descent into madness is a little rushed, at least if we are supposed to find him sympathetic or tragic at all, because he's not even invisible for a day before he does that. And the concept of the Invisible Man is the invisibility drives him insane. But no, that's just you using invisibility to get away with something that you are very comfortable doing. So I was a little mixed on that. And Connor, I'm interested to hear what perspective you would bring to that discussion.
Yes, that's actually something I have in my cons here, in my negative section, is that I really was, I'll just say I was a little disappointed in the fact that, like, I feel like with the Invisible Man, if I'm comparing him sympathetic wise to a character, I want him to sort of be more, and I know this isn't the Invisible Man, but just the concept. I'd like it to be a little bit closer to Frankenstein's monster, where this is just sort of like a person who is very curious about this and he's trying to go through this breakthrough. And we get that in this film, don't get me wrong. But I didn't find myself, and this is where I differ from you guys here, is that I didn't find myself being empathetic or sympathetic with this character at all through the movie.
Okay.
I felt like he was extremely charismatic, and I could see why the characters were interacting with him the way that he was. And don't get me wrong, that performance, I think, was still stellar. But there wasn't a moment in the movie where I was like, yeah, this is a good dude who's a little flawed. I was like, yeah, this guy's kind of a piece of shit. And and then he gets invisible, and then he turns into a bigger piece of shit. And so even though I felt like when he got to the Invisible Man stage of things, it got really, really cool. And the things that happened, even though some of it was really brutal and definitely made me sympathize with him less. I didn't find myself really feeling sympathetic for him or empathetic for him at any point throughout the film. And that's my biggest complaint. I really sort of wanted that Frankenstein's monster experience. And I just, I didn't get that personally. Maybe that was my own expectations failing me, but that's my perspective on that.
Well, that's sort of where I say that Kevin Bacon elevates the role. I agree on paper. I don't find much sympathetic about the character at all. But when you see him, when you see the passion that he has for his work, and I think Kevin Bacon,
Kevin Bacon.
That's what this movie was almost called, Kevin Bacon, because Kevin breaks in. Yeah.
Kevin Bacon.
No, when Kevin Bacon can bring out that side to him that is genuinely passionate about the science he's doing, that's not just a power trip for him, which I think that's how the script is handling it. And I think Kevin Bacon, being the bro he is, I think he wanted to try to bring out a bit more nuance to his personality. But moving on to a negative that I have, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Cody. I thought the tone was a little uneven. I think for a lot of people, the turn that Sebastian's character will take isn't just surprising. It just feels like it came out of a different movie, maybe. So I don't know. Did you find the tone to be uneven in any way that, like, I'm describing as maybe like problematic?
I haven't personally, but I could see where you would say that. There's some movies that just kind of just take that gigantic turn on a dime. Like From Dusk Till Dawn is one that I think of off the top of my head. I don't know if that correlates exactly, but yeah, this is one that's more, science fiction, a little thriller, and then it's just full on slasher horror in the last 30 minutes on a dime. And I don't know. I kind of like having a surprise like that once in a while. This is one that I think it worked for me, but I could see where that might surprise some people in a way that they did not enjoy or were not really prepared for. The movie didn't ease them into it enough, especially if you're not really too big on slashers or gore, because there's a lot of it. So I get it. I get that. One thing I did think of, it's not so much a negative. It's just something that I've always thought that I kind of forgot about until you guys brought up Josh Brolin again. I thought that it was weird that after he turned invisible, it seemed like Kevin Bacon's character was no longer working on his own cure. He was waiting for everybody else to do it. Like there's a point where Josh Brolin comes in where he's like, "Oh, I got it," and then it gets to 98%, and he's just like talking down to him, like, "Oh, it's pathetic, whatever." And I remember always thinking, like, "Well, fucking you do it then, genius! Like, what are you doing? You're sitting around."
Oh, but that's actually like I think that was like a really interesting element to throw, and they actually address it in the very next scene. Elizabeth Shue comes in, and she's like, "Why are you being such a dick? Why aren't you at least helping us? Really, all you're doing is whining." And I think Kevin Bacon's character has kind of given up on the idea of even wanting to go back to his old life.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
That's how I read it, actually.
It's funny because I didn't have that on my list of cons, but it's something that I did clock during the movie. And I got to be honest, Gabe, you kind of turned that around for me. I didn't expect that. But yeah, I guess that makes a lot more sense when it's put that way. I didn't even think about that next scene. But Cody was bringing it up, and I was like, "Oh, cool! I got something else I could put in here." And then you kind of ruined it for me, buddy. But I do have something that I do want to bring up, and I know I'm going to be in the minority here, and I may be in the minority in the audience as well. I really, really enjoyed the third act of the movie, and I think the build to the third act throughout, I guess, Act 2 is very entertaining as well. But I'd say like the first 30 minutes of this movie, I don't know what it was. I was having a really hard time getting through it. I don't know if it was just the tone I wasn't expecting or what. I don't know if it was just this viewing. And Gabe, you're privy to this because we've been recording together for a while. But sometimes I'm just in a mood, man, when I'm watching a movie. And I wasn't in a bad mood or anything this time around. And I don't know. It was something about that 30 minutes of the movie that just didn't work in this. It took away from the movie for me, and it really made the rest of it have to work harder in order for me to come out with a good feeling about the movie. I think it was more so just I wasn't connecting with Kevin Bacon's character, and that's really the character that I feel like does the most heavy lifting in that first part. So yeah, that first 30 minutes for me was really tough, and I can't really explain it. I really liked the scene with the gorilla and everything, but everything else just didn't really clock.
Well, I think you're speaking to the problem that I was having, where the first 30 minutes aren't very emblematic of the tone of the rest of the movie. You know, usually a horror movie, especially one that is not afraid to go places like this one, it'll establish that tone quick. It'll try to hook the audience that way. And this movie, for whatever reason, didn't feel the need to hook us with that. I mean, there is that opening shot of I think it's the mouse getting eaten by like an invisible cat or something. It does feel like it takes a while for me to understand what this movie is going for.
Yeah, I could get that again. I kind of like the way that the movie progresses, kind of very quickly at times. Where first half or first 30 minutes or so is very science fictiony, and there's not really a whole lot of horror vibes. And then all of a sudden, the second act, you get those thriller aspects and the slow dark turn of Sebastian. And then third act is full blown slasher. So I kind of enjoy it for that non-conventional structure, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, and I think that's probably how Verhoeven saw it. Like that's probably the way he justified it as he took that approach. You know, it's funny because RoboCop is a movie that opens right away with the kind of movie that you can expect. You know, just like the ultra violence, just how skeezy this world is going to be. And Hollow Man actually takes its time. And as I say that, I'm not sure how I feel about that anymore. I have seen some reviews, especially like back in the day, that said they liked the first 30 minutes and they hated the rest of it. So there you go.
You know, honestly, it's funny because like if I don't, I still think there's part of that first act after the first 30 minutes of the movie. At least there's a little bit of that tone that carries into the second act, if anything. And I really enjoy that part of it. You know, when he first kind of goes invisible and they're exploring the cool aspects of it, it's very lighthearted. And in that sense, it really works. And I think the moment that the film sort of turned for me was sort of the moment that he got in the seat, you know, or got, you know, strapped down to get the injection.
Well, you just like seeing Kevin Bacon's ass. Let's be 100%.
Honest. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
that's
look,
the money shot.
Look, let's be no, but you know, in all honesty, I don't know if some of the animal stuff at the beginning didn't work, and for me personally, and once it got to that moment where he finally kind of goes invisible and we kind of don't know what's going to happen, and then they start exploring it, and there's this curiosity, that's when the movie really gripped me. But before that, I had a hard time having it grip me. That being said, though, for me, those are really my only major complaints that I had written down. And I'm curious if Gabe, you had anything else you wanted to bring up before we continued on to the audience's complaints.
Yeah, there is. And, you know, this might seem like a cheap shot because it's a horror movie and people love using the excuse. But because the characters are smart sometimes, I'm a little disappointed when they do make dumb decisions. And as much as I enjoyed the performances of Josh Brolin and Elizabeth Shue, I had a hard time understanding why they were going along with this unbelievably bad idea that Kevin Bacon has, where he's going to lie to the Pentagon so he can do the test on himself. And it's clearly a vanity project. I don't know. I mean, is that a problem for you guys at all?
No, I mean, there's a line, if I remember correctly, where Josh Brolin is talking to her and kind of like, why are we doing this? And she says, probably because we know that he can pull it off. And when you think about the beginning of the movie, I forget the time frame that they gave, but they've been sitting for months, a year, whatever it is, trying to figure out how to bring everybody back, all the animals that they've done. So they're kind of like creatively bored at that point, where they're just sitting around waiting for Sebastian to crack it. For God knows how long. And then he finally does. It's the most exciting thing ever. Holy shit, we did this. We can take people invisible and we can bring them back. This is going to change the world. And they know that the government's going to take that entire program, all that creativity, all that joy, all that wonder away from them immediately after it's proven. And so when they have that little bit of temptation there, not nearly the amount of that Sebastian has, but that little bit of temptation of, I kind of want to see what it's like to make a human go invisible and come back. I want to be there for that. Fuck the government. That's kind of how I read it.
Well, and that's funny, Gabe, because like something that you highlighted earlier actually made that moment work a lot better for me, which is that these characters, with the exception of one of them, who does not know that the government did not approve this, all have this soft spot for him and know, you know, his passion for this project. And on top of, like Cody said, the temptation of kind of seeing what this is going to turn out like and their own natural curiosity. I think one of the things that helps contribute it too is that, I mean, first off, they've spent all this time together. I mean, we it's presumed that they've been doing this for quite a long time.
Sure.
But also they all know this guy. They all know that this is his life's work, and as much as they're a part of it, and they don't want, you know, somebody else to come take it over, and I think he does a little bit convincing on that side. They also do have this soft spot for this character where they know, like, this is this guy's whole life, and
Yeah.
this is somebody that we feel for. So that, for me, like what you highlighted earlier, makes this work a little bit more for
Oh
me.
wow, I guess I beat
You
myself
diffused your own
on
point,
my own
bitch.
worst. I mean, it's not, to be clear, that was really more of a nitpick than anything,
Right.
because I already anticipated, like, yes, there are, they acknowledge it. It's not like they completely look past it. But you know, I would hope for, because some movies are so airtight and they really try to make people's motivations as credible as possible. And this is just a moment where I feel like the switch from going they're annoyed at him in that boardroom because he's about to throw them under the bus, or at least could, to, you know, going along with it. It could have been a smoother transition. That's all I'm saying. But that's really the end of it for me, and negatives, at least as far as my own personal problems with the movie.
Well, then I think there's nothing else for us to do but to cover some of the audience's issues with this film. And that's something that, man, reading reviews was really interesting, because Letterboxd, I think, is the reason that we use it on this podcast, and we've talked about this before, is that for me at least, it's a really good gauge of what the modern audience, or what the audience as a whole, it's a direct view into people who watch these movies, whether they're fans or whether they're not fans. They go to Letterboxd and they put in a rating. And for this movie, it was really surprising because I felt like a lot of the sensibilities that are now present in modern times were used as a grading scale for this film. And I don't know how much of that will play into this, but I saw lots of mentions of things like toxic masculinity, which is not a phrase that we heard until, you know, last decade or so. And so it'll be interesting to see how many of these things fall into this ugly category. But one of the things that the audience didn't like is something that Gabe brought up a little bit here, and it's that some of the things in this movie do feel rushed for the audience. We've sort
specifically
of heard,
Kevin Bacon, Sebastian Cain's arc, yes, you know, his descent into madness, right?
And that's a big complaint that the audience has, and I think we've at least you know, glanced that topic a little bit as we've talked about it. But just to sort of throw something in there from my side as we get into this, is just, I just feel like it's sort of one of those things that I don't think it was too rushed on from my side. I think you sort of saw the seeds planted from some of the things he said throughout the movie. Like, this is a vulgar guy. He's already wanting to peep on people. He's already wanting to do all this shit before he even goes invisible. Makes sense that as soon as he goes invisible, he would start to partake in some of those things. You know, I mean, like, he literally, this is a character who at one point said the words "wonder pussy." So, you know, it's not,
well, not just Wonder Pussy. Let's really acknowledge the creative extent of that whimsical rape joke of his.
Yes, the whole thing. I mean, this, for me, it was a character that already had the seeds planted that this is something he's capable of doing if he gets to that level. And I think it was meant to shock you how quickly and to what extent he went there. But for me, it felt like that's what they intended to do, and that's what it did for me. And it sounds like, Cody, if I'm not wrong, that sounds like sort of how you felt about it. It worked as designed for you in that way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're catching up with these characters after they're already established. The relationships are established. His, you know, God complex and everything like that's already established. So, it's to me, from the beginning, you get little hints, whether it's him telling a Superman joke or the way that he talks to his ex, or kind of corners her whenever he talks to her and, you know, hovers over her and has a little bit of that, you know, I'm the more powerful, smart one, you know, this, like, he's always had all of it there. He just needed to have the confidence that he's not going to have any repercussions to actually follow through with any of it. And once he does, you get the movie.
Yep. And he needed that push into insanity a little bit too, which this provided it.
I think it's all about how you go into this movie, the mindset that you have, what you expect, because I think the way these movies typically go is, you have a noble but tragically flawed hero that, is afflicted with something that makes them descend into madness. And you're like, oh no, this soul, this precious soul has been lost to evil. I don't know. But I think this movie, in retrospect, is playing out very differently. And I think it works much better on this level, that a powerful man that everybody was giving a pass because of his authority and his talents. But look what happens when you give him free reign. Look at what happens when you give him this power. That's a conversation people are having a lot of. And I think that's something that Leigh Whannell's Invisible Man explored quite well. That's really the theme of that movie. So I don't know. The question is, which is the way that works better? The tragic scientist or the monster unleashed?
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like they both tackle similar things in such a different way. I will go on record as saying that I absolutely loved Leigh Whannell's take on The Invisible Man.
Sure.
I really hope that we get a follow-up to that. It's fun to make those comparisons, but I think one of the things that you brought up in there that I really want to sort of use to transition into our point about, or to another point, and I want to kind of weave this in with a few things, because one of the things that we thought would kind of be interesting is how audiences sort of felt expectation-wise for this director going into this movie, and some of the things they might have been satisfied with and some of the things that they weren't. And one of the consistencies that I saw in reviews and reading them was that we got everything that we expected that this director does poorly, and everything that we didn't get what we expect as far as the things that he does well. That's something I saw very consistently, and that sort of weaves into the complaint that Gabe and I talked about off camera, which is that many people think that this film is very mean-spirited. I mean, there is lots of talk and jokes about sexual assault and rape. We see these things play out in front of us. Man, YouTube is gonna fucking shit on this video, but yeah, I mean, this is something that we see throughout this entire movie, and like from the beginning of the film. And one of the things that was highlighted too is that Kevin Bacon's character is very much on top of this woman like the whole time. And as many reviews said, a modern phrase for a lot of what happens in this is the toxic masculinity of everything. And even though that's not a phrase I use often, it's a phrase that I saw so consistently across these reviews. And that all plays into this idea that this film is very mean-spirited. And I'd like to start with you, Cody. And I know that this is a film that you you do have a lot of good things to say about. To me, like, there's a lot of things that could be construed as mean-spirited in this movie. Do you see that side of things? And if you do, does that play into your enjoyment of the film? Or do you kind of see that side where the audience is kind of bitching about it, for lack of a better term?
I think it's really weird thing to complain about because he's a villain. And so it's just like, toxic masculinity in a villain, the guy that we're supposed to see get vanquished by the end and root for the other people that aren't that. Like, it's a very odd thing to complain about for me. Like, villains are villains because they have traits of people in the world that we do not want to see more of. Whatever trait that is depends on the movie and the villain. But, the narcissism and the toxic masculinity, whatever you want to call it, that's his character, and that's why he turns into such an evil prick. And then they have to stop him by the end of it. And so that's a weird complaint. I'd have to hear it in context, I guess, or read the review, but it feels to me like I was kind of fingering through a couple of the quotes and everything from Rotten Tomatoes, and even some of the on Wikipedia that's like at the time of 2000 and everything like that. And I can't help but feel like maybe this movie just came out at the wrong time, because you think about the year 2000. I mean, the 90s was not a strong year for horror. Scream's the only movie really that gets any credit from that entire decade. And for the first year in the 2000s, we hadn't really had the torture porn side of things and Saw and Hostel. We didn't start to have any of the horror remakes that kind of defined that whole that decade. And so you have this movie that's just kind of strangely stuck in here, that's going for the horror slasher route. It's appealing to Verhoeven fans with one of the most straightforward things that Verhoeven's ever done. And I just think people didn't know how to handle it because, you know, at the time it was just like, well, horror sucks. So if it's a horror movie, it must suck. You know, I'm not really that type of person to try to assign motivations to people's reception. I'm sure a lot of people watch this and just genuinely don't like it, and that's totally fair. But for the consistent level of the same things that I've kind of scrolled past, and you know, it having a in the 20s in Rotten Tomatoes is just kind of a little surprising to me. But yeah, for mean spirited, when I say that, I tend to talk about a movie that is just like really going at it with the violence to a point where it's not entertaining anymore. It's just like gross.
Yeah.
That like again, not to bring up the you know the movie that we shall not name, Blood and Honey, but like that was a word that I used when I described Blood and Honey, because you have this character in that movie that the only character that has any story in that movie, where she was a victim of some kind of paranoia, and you know somebody was peeping on her and everything like that, and so she's got this trauma, and you're like, well, where's that going to play into the third act? Oh, it plays into it by, you know, her just getting her throat cut and then just getting stabbed on camera in her face like 7 or 8 times as the other character runs away. And so when I think mean spirited, I think it's like you're taking a character whose arc doesn't make any sense for them to die in such a violent way, and it's just gratuitous. It's just like, let's make it as fucked up as possible just because.
Yeah.
And I don't really feel that way with this movie. Like, you know, some of the deaths are quick. There's like a couple strangulations. Of course, you could argue that with the sexual assault things, that is a pretty consistent theme here, but I think that plays into the toxic male, the God complex, the narcissism, I can do whatever I want, nobody can stop me thing. And so I think it has a place.
Yeah, when we talk about mean-spiritedness in horror, because I've accused horror movies of being mean-spirited and sort of caught myself, and I've tried to understand why, because I like, you know, I mean, me and Connor are big Rob Zombie fans, and he's had to deal with that criticism a lot, and I've had to defend him from that criticism a lot. So where does mean-spiritedness stick out as a sour note? And I think, and I'm not talking about Hollow Man, I'm talking about other kinds of movies that do exist for the sake of showing people in pain. Like there's no arc, there's no triumph. And sometimes they do a little switcheroo where you think this character might get even a little bit of hope or some reprieve. And then they're just met with the grimmest possible fate, because that's, you know, some directors out there want to prove how edgy they are. This movie, you know, 2000 was a time that was still dominated by this really like hysterical anti-violence rhetoric and how people talked about horror movies. I mean,
or clean violence, like in horror movies too.
Right. You know, American Psycho, people were saying the exact same thing about American Psycho. Came out the same year. I don't think this is as good or as smart as American Psycho in the way it uses violence, but that's where the landscape was. But the difference is American Psycho has, like, people have gone back to reevaluate that film, probably because of Christian Bale and because it was based on this acclaimed book, whatever the reason. I don't think Hollow Man has gotten that reappraisal. Like, people haven't gone back to really give this movie a second chance, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one of the things, like, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, so sorry if I'm shitting on a movie that you like, but when I hear mean spirited, I think of shit like this, like a Serbian film, you know, shit that like really, like, I have no desire to watch it again. It just felt, everything about the movie felt mean spirited to me, and that's what I think of when I think of movies like that. But I can sort of see where people would sort of take that from this time, because I'm looking at the list of films that came out, horror films that came out in 2000, and we're seeing films like Scream 3 and Ginger Snaps, The Cell, Blair Witch 2, Hellraiser Inferno, Dracula 2000, Leprechaun in the Hood. These are all movies that, like, okay, like, where does the Hollow Man fit with those? I don't think it really does. Mm-hmm. But I think that that's to the film's benefit. I think Cody's right when he says that I think this film was released at a bad time. I think if this had been released maybe the same year as House of a Thousand Corpses, where we sort of saw that turn in violence in mainstream horror. Because after House of a Thousand Corpses, you kind of have the opening of the floodgates with the films like Saw, and just that torture porn category comes up. This film is not that, but it I think people would find it much less mean spirited if it came out during that time, as opposed to during a time of very, I hate to say sanitized horror, because like Final Destination came out that year too, but I don't know what else to call
Scream
it.
3 is one of the most sanitized
It's
slasher
very
movies that I can think of.
Yes.
And that's not even a criticism. That's just, where horror was.
That's the thing. Yeah, not a criticism.
You also have to remember that Hollow Man came around a time when these classic movie monsters were being remade in very prestigious fashion. I'm talking Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's the most famous example. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And I bet when people saw Paul Verhoeven and Kevin Bacon teaming up to do a new take on The Invisible Man, they did not expect this.
Yeah, I was hoping when The Invisible Man came out, and that was a movie that was pretty universally praised all across the board, that this would get mentioned more and people would go back and rediscover it, but it never seemed to kind of fit into the conversation. Everybody acted like The Invisible Man of a couple years ago was the first time it had been done, and I was like, wait, go back.
Excuse me. No, hopefully we can give this the not that bad bump. Somebody, people can take a look at it.
Yeah, you know how Weird Al helped musicians out.
God damn it. We are no, Gabe, I will not let you compare us to
save movies on this channel. No, but that actually brings up a really interesting question for me. Would this movie have a better chance if it were just called The Invisible Man? Because I mean, it is not based on H.G. Wells's novel. H.G. Wells's name is not on this, unlike with the more recent version of this story. And while I'm sure the filmmakers wanted to distance themselves to give themselves creative license, did that actually hurt it in the end? Would we be hearing more about this movie if it was one of a series of adaptations of The Invisible Man?
Probably. I think the title has a little bit more meaning behind their choice there. He's quite literally a hollow man. He's got nothing inside of him. But from a marketing standpoint, it would pop up in the search engine.
Yeah, I'm not talking about what would be right creatively. Just
I'm with you.
Just would it have helped the whatever the marquee value?
I think it would have. The one thing that I think it could have potentially hurt is the disappointment from the audience with it. But I think as far as like the attention that it would have gotten, I think it would at the very least, I think it would have had more articles than there was. I found one article while researching this movie that revisited this after the release of The Invisible Man. Don't remember who did it. Probably one of the horror publications that we're familiar with. But there was a revisiting there. But on a mass level, no, there wasn't. And I'm a perfect example of that. This movie was not even in my head. And I love The Invisible Man. So, that's one of the things that's really interesting about this, is that the audience that did hate it really hasn't given it a chance again. And the people who would have had a chance with like other films that have turned into cult films to visit this for the first time later on have not gotten there yet. We don't have that sort of cult building. So I don't know. Maybe that's because of some of the reviews. Maybe it's, it's sitting not too pretty on every single thing that it's on. And one of the last reasons I wanted to bring up for people to say that is the last 10 or so minutes of the movie, where we get a little bit over the top with things. For some people that really didn't work. I mean, once he starts getting burned and the elevators falling and all of these things that really kind of, they're sort of more so tropes of action adventure films than they are of horror. This is not a complaint at all for me, so I don't really have anything interesting to say. But is this something that any of you can see at all from the audience here?
Well, before I pass it to Cody, if I can, I think, add a little more context. I think what people are complaining about is that after establishing, let's say, a more serious tone, I think this movie takes itself pretty seriously. And it has just done a lot of very clever things that you might see in a really crafty slasher movie. I think everything from him getting burned really shifts gears in a way that people didn't appreciate, because, having invisibility shouldn't necessarily give you fire protection or getting hit with a crowbar protection or I don't know, getting electrocuted protection. So with that in mind, Cody, is that something that stood out to you at all?
No, crybabies. No, I'm just kidding. I feel like there was a line in there where they say that he gets stronger from being invisible. They give no
Really?
logic sense to it whatsoever. But unless I'm mistaken, I feel like she says something along the lines like he's getting stronger, or he's stronger. I don't know. I didn't have a chance to revisit it to watch it before we went live, so I'm going off of memory.
That's all
But the third act. I mean, I don't know. I guess it switches from that slasher tone to a more over the top action, last 10 minutes or whatever. But again, like kind of echoing what I was saying earlier, I kind of like the fact that the movie continues to change what it's going for on a dime, and you get all these different flavors in there. And so I've always been entertained by it. I think it's a pretty cool little end note there where they're in a bunch of different danger, and then he's climbing up the ladder and can see them, and he's just going to take them both down. It's not about living anymore. It's about making sure they don't win.
I actually love the fact that he spends the last 10 minutes in that kind of like in between form of visibility where you only see everything under the flesh.
Yeah.
That was like a really, even if the CGI doesn't hold up in certain shots, which, I never like complaining about CGI when a movie is trying its hardest. No, I thought that was like a pretty interesting choice. I think the final shot of him falling down into the fire stood out to me as something that didn't feel as appropriate. I think if he had gotten, I think there might have been a more fitting way to end that character. I'm not sure, but at the same time, I mean, when he survives being electrocuted, you got to take extreme measures. So you just got to drop that son of a bitch down the elevator shaft.
And I thought it was really crafty the way that they landed there to that last shot. For me, I mean, when she sort of just like relents and sort of plays into his ego for a second, to kind of let it betray him. That was like a moment that I really appreciated about the movie, and that over the top nature at the end there is something that I mean, I didn't look away from the screen, and that's I was interested to see where it was going to go. I knew he was going to be alive, but like, you start to get the way that they paced it was really good for me too, because the way that they sort of said it, like they're climbing up and there are other things that are sort of like in a weird way, like the villain, that almost like the gigantic ball from Indiana Jones, there's something else other than a human that is causing them grief at this moment. And I felt that way about that scene. And I was like, okay, maybe this is like the last moment of tension before the movie ends. And then he's back. And I didn't really expect him to be back, to be quite honest. I thought we were getting to the end of the movie. So yeah, like I really like that over the top part, because I felt like it kept the tension up in a way that wasn't scary, but you still felt like, what's going to happen next? How are they going to get out of the situation? Is she going to die? That was the thing that I was asking myself.
I thought Josh Brolin might die.
Be the last guy. I thought he might die a few times, but at that last moment where they're both standing there, I'm like, I don't see a way that she gets out of this. So I thought it was really crafty, and I can see where the audience may take a perspective of being very jarred by this. It's a very jarring change, I suppose, for some. But I don't have any complaints about it. I really enjoyed the end of this movie. The whole final act.
That sounds like a complaint from somebody who already didn't like the movie.
And I would think so.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean,
again, I don't like to assign motivations to people, but I review enough films that I can pick up where it's just like, oh, they just didn't like anything, and it's just like, what else can I fucking do? This sucks.
Just start grabbing shit.
No, and I specifically think people who felt like this was a dumbed down Verhoeven movie love pointing to that as she's like, he just fucking drops down an elevator shaft.
Right.
I mean, and there is like a good moment that you mentioned, Connor, about her playing off his ego and stuff. But just, again, I think people wanted their thematic Paul Verhoeven. And this is kind of closer to the Paul Verhoeven who did Basic Instinct. Very entertaining movie. And it's a movie that that has a real legacy. Which Hollow Man, unfortunately, I guess it just falls too much in the middle between complete shock and pure genius for some people.
Yeah.
Because I kept wondering, is this movie too good for its own good? because I think like nobody will ever put this on for a bad movie night. It's too well made. It's too well acted. So you don't get that kind of reappraisal, but then people will obviously, continue to take issue, I guess, with the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's funny because like of his movies that are more well known, this is actually the lowest rated. I'm surprised to see that Showgirls sits at a 3.1 on Letterboxd.
No, it does not. Does it really?
I'm not bullshitting you right now.
Are you saying that Showgirls is not eligible for our show?
It is not eligible for our fucking show. And believe it or not, I read a lot of reviews where people said, I don't care what you say about Showgirls, this is his worst movie. And after fucking watching and sitting through Showgirls, how in the blue hell do you come to that conclusion?
But you know what?
Just don't know.
That must be, and that actually perfectly speaks to my point. That must be some sort of ironic appreciation. Okay, I don't think anybody watches Showgirls and takes that movie seriously enough to even like give it a thoughtful review.
I hope Cody's not like a fucking closeted Showgirls fan and we're here shitting on it.
Then let's fight. Let's fight.
Okay, good. Okay,
I know enough about it. I've seen the scenes, like the little fucking flopping in the pool and stuff, and I'm like, oh, that movie. Okay.
Oh, okay. But,
yeah, it's the movie that it was such a bad movie that they were making jokes about it in other movies just a year after it came out.
Yeah.
I think Scream 2 took a shot at Showgirls. It came out 2 years later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
it's funny.
But that's because Showgirls, for whatever you want to say about it, I mean, it's entertainingly bad, goofy, silly, whatever.
You could say
that's not an advantage that Hollow Man has. And that brings me to, because I love to end on these sort of bigger questions, like bigger than one movie, just like a general idea of, do we celebrate bad movies too much when we should be actually like going back and taking second chances at movies that really did try? I mean, I think you have to acknowledge that Hollow Man was a very serious attempt, if nothing else.
Yeah, I tend to fall in that category where I get frustrated sometimes. Like, we all have nostalgia, and I forgive nostalgia because nostalgia is a powerful thing, and I have plenty of movies that on paper are probably pretty trashy, but I just can't help but love them because I loved them for so long. Mm-hmm. And so I get that. But yeah, like Friday the 13th is a franchise that comes to mind when I think of that, where I so many passionate defenders, greatest thing ever, you don't know what you're talking about, and it's just like, guys, some of these movies really fucking suck. Like, I get it if like whatever, it's fun, but like the first one especially, like the first Friday the 13th movie to me is a terrible movie to be considered a classic. And then you have movies, like, there you go. Yeah, movies like this that you look at the scores and you're just like, how? And some movies deserve a second watch, and it's hard to motivate people to do it.
Oh man.
I must have touched a nerve.
Let me just say, as a Friday the 13th fan, they are the greatest thing, and you don't know what you're talking about. Sorry, Cody. The original Friday the 13th is a movie that I've seen all of once, and I just thought it was just an instant classic. Just
what we got here, a fucking comedian.
Just imagine your finger hovering over that button this whole time.
Oh my god!
As soon as you were doing defense mode, I was like, Go ahead, speak about it.
No, but I mean, it's even like, and Friday the 13th is an interesting example because, well, I mean, there are genuinely good movies in that franchise, and they're so bad they're good movies. So, like, I'll do a marathon and I'll still watch, I don't know why, but I'll still watch Friday the 13th Part 3, even though that's not in any measurable way by me a good movie. But then you have like recent horror movies coming out, and I'm not going to name names because why would I do that? But
it's always been this weird thing with horror, and like critically and even audience for a long time there, like horror hasn't really gained any form of respect until just recently. Like, of course, everybody loves the classics. You pull out a Nightmare on Elm Street, there's some people would say Friday the 13th, Halloween. And there's not a whole lot of argument about those, but that was also kind of like the beginning of it all. Right. And then you have that whole era where it's just like, oh yeah, horror's garbage, and there's no nuance to that. It's just that's just a rule. It can only be so good, and it's not very high. And then now that horror tends to dive into social commentary a lot more, and you're getting more of a prestigious filmmaker doing it, and you're getting, movies that are talking about social issues. And now all of a sudden people are opening their eyes going, ooh, horror is good now. And there's a lot of movies that got lost in the fray, to where there it is that weird middle ground where it's not like this undisputed, undoubtedly amazing horror film that nobody can argue, like Silence of the Lambs or something like that came out around this, the 90s. Or it's just the absolute schlock that a lot of us diehard horror fans can have fun with sometimes. Maybe we shouldn't. And so, like, if you even want to step out of Friday the 13th, like, there's a whole bunch of other movies that I've been recommended. Like The Prowler is one of them. Either you a fan of The Prowler before I continue?
No. I respect the work that Tom Savini did on The Prowler.
Okay, that's all I need to hear. Yeah. So anyway, this movie was one that when I first watched it, everybody, you got to watch The Prowler. You got to watch The Prowler. It took me like 6 times to get through it, because I was just like, okay, aside from Tom Savini's kills, this sucks. And like, there's so many movies like that have this admiration over time within the horror genre for one thing that they did great. Like, there was those kills that were awesome, or you look at a movie like The Burning that I do like, but it's known for, again, Tom Savini's work and not much else. But then you get a movie like this, like you said, it's in that weird spot where, somewhat prestigious director, really top quality acting, A-list effects, and it's like, what do we do with this? What's going on here? And so
and it deals with, and not to cut you off, Connor, but to throw in that extra thing of, it deals with too many heavy issues. Like, I think sexual assault spoils bad movie night, or at least it should.
Yeah.
To anybody out there, don't even think about it.
Oh my God.
But what were you going to say, Connor?
No, I mean, like, look, everything that you guys said so far rings true for me. The one thing that I will say is, like, I do think, I think people need to find a balance, because I think one of the things that this show's sort of built on both sides of that. I think it's built on one side of it where we say, like, hey, like, here's this movie, like, people think it's bad. It's really not. But then we do sometimes see a movie come across, whether it's recommended by a guest or it's just a movie that I force you to watch, or you force me to watch. And
I haven't forced you to watch much of anything, Connor. I think I'm the victim in most of this.
Most of it, sure. I am the one who selected Resurrection and Nothing But Trouble and many things so far that I think has been torturous for you. But I think that there's two sides of that too, because for some people, the bad things about movies that us who watch movies traditionally will find bad about a movie, some people just don't. That's part of why they enjoy it. And I see that side of things, and that's why I enjoy some movies. I mean, fuck, like, my wife and I, like, cheer watching the movie Chopping Mall. That movie's fucking awful. But we're cheering the whole time. There are ways to enjoy bad movies. But I think the point that you guys made about the fact that these movies, like Hollow Man or like so many other films that just slip into the cracks, there needs to be a voice for those movies, I feel like. I hope that we can be that somewhat on this show. I mean, shit, we've covered some really shitty movies, but we've covered some movies as well that I really think people need to revisit. And I think, as horror has sort of evolved to, like, really top tier, and not just, like, by the way, not just the audience. I mean, people in Hollywood really changing the way that they look at it. I mean, a top tier actress like Mia Goth, with her performances in X and Pearl, I don't know that we would have gotten something like that.
Or, like, go to The Invisible Man, right? The star of that was her name escapes me, but
Kate Moss, right? Kate Moss, is that? No,
Elizabeth Moss.
Elizabeth Moss.
Kate Moss is a model. But Emmy and Golden Globe winner from Mad Men and all that, and she's starring in an Invisible Man remake that would have been practically unheard of, like 30-40 years ago.
Yeah, but I think that brings us back to this film, and I went through everything that I had seen from the audience here. I'm curious if anybody else has any final takes before we get into our final verdicts on the movie. Any final say about how the audience has sort of not really given this a chance?
Give it a chance, you bastards.
Give it a fucking chance.
We'll put a trigger warning. I mean, if you're not prepared some of the directions that this movie goes could be genuinely upsetting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to know that they were going to go even farther in the original cut, which I'm wondering if that footage even exists, because I do have a morbid curiosity. But
there is a director's cut.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it's on a DVD or if it's on the Blu-ray. I've seen it. From memory, they probably still did not get to do near what he wanted to do. I mean, he goes pretty extreme in some of his other films, but like the sexual assault scene specifically, I think they just add a couple more shots of just her kind of getting thrusted onto the bed. It's not overly gratuitous to where it's just like, okay, we're gonna show her spread eagle, or like it's nothing like that. But that's all I can remember. It says it's 7 minutes longer, so I'm totally spacing what the rest of those 7 minutes are, aside from a couple of Rona Mitra thrusts.
It's on HBO Max for anybody that wants to see it.
Yeah, that's how I saw it. And I'm sure that was the theatrical version.
There is the director's cut on there too in the special features section.
Really? Why don't they just put it in? Okay, fine.
I don't know.
All right. Because I would have watched that. I've never seen that version before. But finally, there is a movie that has a lot more prestige to its name in the horror community called The Entity. And The Entity is about a woman that is being continually sexually assaulted by a ghost in her house. It's this early 80s sort of hidden gem. And I would say if you like that movie, or if you're even intrigued by a movie that deals with such themes, I honestly think Hollow Man is respectable just in the same way that movie is. So I would recommend Hollow Man to a pretty specific subsect. Is that a word? I feel like every once in a while I make up a word.
You do, but we're just gonna roll with it. You know, it works.
Well, now it's a new word. It's basically in the dictionary.
Yeah,
so
we need a not that bad dictionary as well.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think this movie does have an audience, and people who, if you've been concerned by the reputation of this movie, definitely give it a chance.
Yeah. That leads us to our final verdicts here. So we kind of just will wrap up our feelings on the film before we close out the episode. And for those who are coming to us for the first time, we do have a rating scale here. You know, we know movies are not that bad that we cover, but we have 4 potential ratings that a film can land on. It's either that bad, it's not that bad, it is actually good, or it's actually great. And we haven't had too many actually greats. I don't know if that's going to change in this episode, but Cody, seeing as you were gracious enough to come on the show and bring this here, I would like to hear your final thoughts. And if you could give it a rating on our scale, I'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, it judging by off of the audience reception, everything, it's definitely a movie that's due for a rewatch. I think horror is in the right landscape now, where maybe people's mindsets will be a little bit more different, where they can accept us a little better. I think that for the most part, Kevin Bacon's got a pretty awesome track record with horror films. This is right up there with me with like Stir of Echoes and stuff like that he's done. Yeah. It's awesome. It's a really, really good example of CGI, even for the 2000s. Just in general, it's a good example. I think that it's a really interesting character that you kind of love to hate because of a performance like Kevin Bacon. It really goes for it in the end if you're a gore hound, you like your slasher films and stuff like that. So I think it's got a little bit of everything for everybody. Yeah. So is there a rating for it's actually fucking awesome? Because I'm kind of stamping that one.
We'll
just for you, Cody. Actually, we'll make an exception just for you.
We'll add that rating above. I would say that's probably above actually great. I would say.
I guess so.
Yeah, I would say that this is a special episode, folks. We have a new rating, and we're going to keep it exclusive to this episode, just so that this episode is that much more special.
There we go.
All right, I guess I'm up next. Yeah. Yes, so I had a really interesting rewatch with this. I think actually, when you first picked it, Cody, and me and Connor were talking about it, I described this movie as the most straightforward movie ever, which I meant both good and bad. But I was impressed upon my rewatch because, in retrospect, this movie is actually hitting on a lot of themes, whether intentional or not. I'm not sure if it was all planned like that, but it is hitting on some pretty resonant themes. And I was very surprised by how provocative I found it the second time around. I knew it had some really great effects. I knew it had some clever writing and, another great performance by Kevin Bacon, but that's the thing that elevates it for me. And that's why I'm going to say it's actually good.
Yeah. And I guess that leads to me. And, it's funny because There are some extra things that I actually had written down in the negatives before we started our conversation today. And to be honest with you, when I finished the film the first time, which was this viewing, of course, um, I found myself not connecting with this movie as much as I thought I would. Like, this had the elements of everything that I would want in a movie. I mean, shit, the charismatic lead, a good cast of characters around it, elements of the story that just really work. There's some good horror stuff, some good sci-fi stuff, some good effects, good dated shit like the awful 2000s rock music that they put in this, and so
I forget to mention that.
so this is a time capsule in a good way for me. There's a lot of things in there that I liked, but there's also so many things that I think on the first watch I didn't connect with as much. And hearing you guys talk about some of that stuff, I was able to ignore a few of the things that I originally had down in the bad because they were no longer bad things for me. Gabe, you specifically just extinguished completely a bad point that I had about this movie. So, thinking on it now, at the point that I'm at, it still does not, I think, connect with me at the level that I think it should. And I think I'm going to be one of those people that rewatches this after a period of time has passed. As of this time, though, I mean, this movie's got a 2.7 on Letterboxd. I can definitively say, even though I am mixed on where I will land right now, and I have a hard time picking a rating, when you look at a 2.7, it is definitively not that bad, and a movie that everybody at the very least should revisit.
Okay.
How I ended up being the villain, picking not that bad and actually decent rating for the show, I don't know, but I have definitely turned myself into the Hollow Man of the episode. That being said, though, I do echo the sentiment that you guys have said so far, that I think this is a movie that's very important to include on lists of films to revisit or to visit for the first time. And I think that's an important thing to do in movies like this. So
yeah, just temper your expectations. It's no Friday the 13th.
No.
There's a lot of things, by the way.
Yes.
Why did I
Definitely
throw
not
that
no
in there?
Friday the 13th.
Yeah. That should be the tagline.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because Kevin Bacon was in Friday the 13th.
Yes, he was. So
And
it is.
there you go. Full circle. We planned it that way.
Full circle. That's we're just that damn good, I suppose. But no, honestly, we've discussed a lot of cool things on this episode. Cody, I want to thank you for coming on today. It was a blast talking with you, and we appreciate you bringing this movie, especially me, who had never seen this before. While most of our audience is absolutely going to know who you are, tell us a little bit about what you do and what you got coming up on your channel.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. It was fun. But yeah, you can find me on YouTube. Just search my name, Cody Leach, Leach. I think the new way that they're doing the web address is youtube.com/@ Cody Leach YT. It's whatever your little tag is now. So that's another way to find me on Twitter. Same thing. It's Cody Leach YT. And as far as what I've got coming out, so I actually dropped my review of the Children of the Corn reboot that me and maybe 5 other people on Earth actually know exists. Of course, I've been going through The Last of Us. Got 2 more episodes of that, so I've got live streams and everything for that. And on Monday, and then we got Scream 6, and so we'll be talking about Scream 6 a little bit. And I have a video planned for talking about some worries / hopes and things that could go good, things that could go bad about Scream 6. That should be coming out here in a couple of days.
Yeah,
all right.
Very excited for the content. And of course, if you're coming to us for the first time from Cody's side, thanks for tuning in, by the way. But you can find us as well. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Not That Bad Pod, and Twitter at Not That Bad, M as in movie, P as in podcast. We are also on Patreon, patreon.com/notthatbad. We do monthly specials and have a goal of reaching $100 a month to start producing weekly episodes of our show. We'd love if you would pitch in if you'd like it, but if not, thanks for coming to the show. Just like, subscribe, and hopefully you'll like us enough to share us around.
Well, let me just say too, to hook you guys in, if you want to hear us defend the majority of the Leprechaun franchise,
Ooh.
from
Lord.
Space to the Hood and back to the Hood.
How do you defend space? That's all I want to know. I'll be tuning in for that one.
Oh,
With that being said, this is Not That Bad, a movie podcast. Signing out. I'm Gabe.
I'm Connor.
And thanks again to Cody. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry. I felt a groove. I went with it.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it.
All right, thanks again, y'all, and catch us next time.